Welcome, everyone. The webinar will begin shortly and will be recorded. Connect with the campaign for grade level reading on social media. On Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Please use hashtag Learning Tuesdays and tag us to tweet anything you learn from today's conversation, and we'll be sure to retweet. We encourage you to share your questions, reflections, and observations on social media. Once again, we would love to connect. So on Facebook, like the page Campaign for GLR, and on Twitter, follow the account at Reading by Third. Okay, welcome again, everyone, to today's webinar. My name is Sierra Sanchez, and I'll be behind the scenes helping to produce this conversation. I have just a few housekeeping details before we get started. First, we would love for you to introduce yourself, so please use the chat box at the bottom of the screen to share your name, city, or state, and your organization. Be sure when responding to select both panelists and attendees so that we all know who is here. All attendees are in listen-only mode, but we encourage you to post any questions that you may have during the conversation into the Q&A box. This webinar is being recorded, and a link to the recording will be emailed to all who registered. And all resources that you see shared as links in the chat will be compiled and shared in a follow-up email to webinar registrants as well. Finally, we'll be posting a brief on-screen evaluation during closing and highly encourage you to respond. This helps us with our commitment to continuous improvement. Finally, before we begin, I would like to call your attention to our upcoming GLR Learning Tuesdays webinars. Next week on April 12th, we have an exciting doubleheader, starting with a Crucible of Practice Salon at 12:30, focused on engaging public libraries as key coalition partners. Later that afternoon, we'll have a session focused on activating your parent village at 3 p.m. The following week on April 19th, we have another exciting Learning Loss Recovery Challenge on taking stock and looking forward. And finally, we invite you to close off the month of April with a session focused on Literate from Day One, state investments that support children's language and literacy development. Registration and more information for these sessions will be posted in the chat box now, and we hope you can join us. Joining you now is Becky Miles-Poca, Senior Consultant with the Campaign for Grade Level Reading. Thank you and enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Sierra, and thanks to everyone who is with us today or who might be watching this at a later time. We're really excited about this webinar, and it's a partners webinar with Learning Heroes, and the content is very exciting. Learning Heroes just released on Friday a report that we're going to be hearing about today on family engagement strategies. And it's really been an honor for me and exciting to learn about their work. As I've been doing that, I've been reflecting on my own experiences as a parent, and back to when my children started school, started kindergarten. And we were really blessed to have actually the same teachers for both of our kids who are almost 6 years apart. And at that time, which was in the late 80s and early 90s, they did parent home visits before the kids started kindergarten. And I just expected that that was the norm. And we had a principal that was very much a supporter of family engagement. There was a room in the building dedicated to families, and it always had, you know, treats and coffee, and she put a washer and dryer in the school at that time, and I just expected it was the norm. And little did I know, as we then, you know, experienced other schools, that indeed it wasn't. And you know, I had the opportunity a few years ago to work with a school district in a state. I'm based here in Iowa, but this was another state in the southern part of the country. And it was, I had the opportunity to interview staff from all levels in that district, from parent liaisons all the way up to superintendent and chief academic officers. And this particular district had implemented some family engagement strategies, and in fact, were reaching out to complement parents when students were improving their attendance and their tardiness. And one of the things that they were hearing across these conversations with families was that, wow, no one ever calls us to compliment us on our kids, even for little things like just improved tardiness, because what we really usually hear is when students have done something wrong. So I think what we're going to hear today is some of the fundamentals on how to do this work around the research that Learning Heroes has done. And so it's really my pleasure today to both introduce and have a conversation with Eyal Bergman, who leads Learning Heroes. And Eyal's bio is fascinating as well. He leads their efforts to support schools, districts, and others that want to build their capacity for deeper and more meaningful partnerships with families. And he recently earned his Doctorate of Education Leadership from Harvard University. And in that pursuit, he partnered with Dr. Karen Mapp, who I'm sure many of you on this know, by co-authoring the Dual Capacity Building Framework for Family and School Partnerships version 2. And many of you have seen that. We're going to pop that in the chat box today. And previously, he was the founder of the Family and Community Engagement Office in the Cajon Valley School District in California. And his work and his views are shaped by his professional experience in community organizing and in youth mentoring, as well as his personal upbringing in a bilingual Latino immigrant home. And so it's really my pleasure to bring Eyal into this conversation and talk a little bit about the research that was just released last Friday. So Eyal, welcome.
Thank you, Becky. Thank you so much for having me.
And we're going to hear from a couple of exciting school districts who are doing this exciting work a little bit later on. And so Sierra, I think with that, you could take this slide down and we can get to the conversation. So you've written this exciting new report called Unlocking the How and Designing Family Engagement Strategies that Lead to School Success. Can you tell us a little bit about it and how it frames today's conversation?
Sure. Well, thank you so much for having me, Becky. It's a privilege to be with you. We call it Unlocking the How because we keep hearing from schools and systems around the country that the pandemic has really elevated the awareness and the need to focus on family engagement. But a lot of folks are asking for the best strategies on how to do that work. So we thought we would pull on what we know and what we've learned to design some recommendations that would be helpful to schools and districts that are asking for that help. And specifically, we pull on three primary sources to guide the recommendations. The first is the 6 years of annual nationally representative surveys that Learning Heroes has done with parents, with teachers, and with principals. And that has really taught us a lot about what each of these groups thinks about the nature of the homeschool relationship. The second really important body of information is, as you described, the dual capacity building framework for family school partnerships. That is a framework that I'm very intimately familiar with, that many of us are really intimately familiar with, and it really focuses on this idea of building capacity, not just of families, but also of educators and of schools and of systems to deliver and drive this type of work. And the third is a recent publication from last year that Dr. Mapp and I released thanks to the Carnegie Corporation of New York, called Embracing a New Normal Toward a More Liberatory Approach to Family Engagement. And that report really takes stock of this era of dual pandemics, offers some high-level policy recommendations. And in it, we speak very plainly. We talk about the nature of the challenge being that parents are just very often treated as spectators to the work of schools, that their cultural wisdom is not really valued or taken into account, particularly not at scale. And that much of family engagement work, myself, my own experience included, is quite assimilationist in nature, which means that we as a school think we know what's right for kids. We have really good notions of what's right for kids. And so we direct towards families what we think they should be doing, but we don't necessarily take from families and incorporate that into what we do in schools. And so our response is to call for a family engagement practice that is a new normal, that is liberatory, which means it is free of hierarchy, or as I've heard Dr. Mapp say the other day, is the offers families the ability to really be free in the spirit of liberation, that it is solidarity driven, which means we walk shoulder to shoulder and not I'm, again, breaking with hierarchy, and that it is equity focused, as in family engagement work is designed and should be really at the heart of it, a key pillar of any district's or school's equity agenda. And so those are the bodies of knowledge and the ideas that we use. And then in unlocking the how, we take it and we get a little bit more granular, a little bit more of like, what can I do as a school leader, as a teacher, even as a district leader? What can I do on Monday morning to design a more effective family engagement strategy? And there, again, the laws of three, we say, focus on trust and teamwork. First, these three pillars, focusing on trust and teamwork, anchoring family engagement strategies in student learning and well-being very specifically, and work on building an infrastructure so that there are structures and systems in a school district that can support this type of work over time. And these are the three pillars that we write about in the report.
So, just listening to you, family engagement is such a huge topic. And why did you land on these three pillars? I mean, you could have selected anything out of, the universe of family engagement. But you chose these three. I mean, they sort of intuitively make sense, but you did a very thoughtful research project in the process. So what led you out of that research with parents and teachers and principals, and what led you to land on these three?
Yeah, and I will say actually that the thing that I get probably most excited about in our report is that we feature about a dozen different schools and systems that are really like shining examples of systems that are trying their best at these. And so we're actually going to hear a lot of what this work actually looks like from Dr. Santelises in Baltimore City Public Schools, who we feature in our report, and Dr. Lori James Gross, the superintendent in Unity Point Consolidated School District in Illinois. So we're going to hear a lot about what this work looks like from them. We focus on these three because we see from experience and we see from the research that this is, if you're going to choose something, like these are the anchors. So on trust, I mean, there is a mountain of evidence that if any family engagement strategy is going to be effective in leading to changes in student outcomes, it has to be rooted in this idea of relational trust. I mean, this research goes back to the 90s in Chicago. Folks may be familiar with Tony Breik and Barbara Schneider's work at the University of Chicago Consortium on School Research. And what they found is that the presence of relational trust really helped sort of like grease all the gears. And there's a lot of moving parts in a school. There's a lot of people. There's students, there's teachers, there's staff, there's administrators, there's families, and all these folks have to work together. And the presence of trust really helps all of those folks really work in concert together. And I think that, I mean, honestly, anybody who's ever worked in schools or anybody who's tried to teach a child or a young person anything understands intuitively the role of trust. And we use the word teamwork because in our surveys, we ask a number of different, we ask teachers, parents, and principals to rate different terms and what represents their goals for family engagement. And we ask things like partnership and collaboration and trust and teamwork and a couple of others. And consistently, the terms trust and teamwork rise to the top amongst the variety of options. So that's why trust and teamwork is so important. We can actually go back to the previous slide. Thank you. We talk about student learning because quite frankly, a lot of what we see around family engagement strategies that in schools don't actually touch on specifically if I'm a parent or I'm a teacher, what I care about most, if I'm a parent, what I care about most is my child. How is my child doing? What are they expected to know how to do at the end of the year? How are they performing now? What are you doing as a teacher to help them? What should I be doing as a parent to help them? But a lot of what we see in schools is not necessarily geared to that core work of what are children supposed to be able to do and perform over time. And so what we're suggesting is try as best as possible to focus on what actually matters most to teachers and to parents, which is student learning and well-being. And the infrastructure piece is just really important because our systems are not designed for effective family engagement work. And so they, in many ways, need to be redesigned in order to support this type of work. And we think about infrastructure as like building a scaffold to allow the adults in the system to really learn how to break from traditional experiences with families to create new experiences and to be able to learn from those experiences, and what are the systems and the supports that leaders can put in place to allow their staff and their colleagues to learn and get better at this work over time.
So can you, we do have a question from the audience. We asked them to put that in Q&A. Can you tell us a little bit more about what this looks like in practice? And I know we're going to hear from a couple of school districts that are really excelling about this, but if a school is excelling at building trust with families and focusing on student learning in their engagement and building an infrastructure for this, what does it really look like in a school, in a building, at a building level or at a district level?
Can we go to the next slide? Because I think that this tees it up really well. It's not that when teachers and parents come together, it's not that they don't have an existing notion of what that work already is supposed to look like. I mean, we all have experiences at back to school night, at parent-teacher conferences and whatnot. So we have what I call, what many call, not just me, is a mental model or existing notions. And oftentimes in that, what I propose, what many of us propose, is this idea of breaking with some of those mental models in order to learn what something different can actually look like. And a lot of those mental models are built on existing power imbalances between home and school. So it's not like teachers or educators go into teaching because they want to flex power over parents, but there are many instruments of power that we don't necessarily think of that way. So for instance, when parents and teachers are talking together, it's very often the educators who are setting the agenda. It's very often taking place at the school and not in the community. It's very often in English and not in parents' native language necessarily, if they don't speak English. These are all ways in which the school actually is more comfortable than the families are. And so what we say is that the best ways to build trust is to fundamentally break with those traditional notions. And so these are images of pre-pandemic home visits in El Cajon, California, which is where I worked for many years. This is a Middle Eastern refugee family that welcomes families into their homes. The one on the right is from Chelsea, Massachusetts, in the middle of the pandemic. You can do visits in the community. And the key there, and I'll pause, or we can go to the next slide actually, is that when we have these experiences where oftentimes when we actually go into the community and we seed the agenda to families and we ask more than we tell to families, it really raises a whole new level of awareness of what families are going through. And that can really challenge existing notions, that can challenge existing biases. And particularly if there's an infrastructure in the school or in the district to unpack what the impact of those biases could be. And so in order to facilitate that, we have this idea of building an infrastructure, which means, defining expectations and competencies. We're going to talk to Dr. Santelises about what they're doing in Baltimore to promote that. Having senior level leadership, that means folks on the cabinet. Most districts don't have somebody on the cabinet that leads family engagement work. Really allocating time for it. In our surveys, teachers by far rate time as the most important structure that districts and schools can give them in order to facilitate communication with families. And really trying to, in the spirit of this dual capacity building framework, is trying to give staff a chance to really learn about this work and focus not just on families getting better at partnership, but also helping educators get better at partnership. And so that's what really at the core of what we mean by building an infrastructure. And all of this is laid out in a lot more detail in our report.
Thank you. And we're going to drop a link to the report in the chat. I think we're about out of time for this section. But we have we do have a video to show, do we not?
Yes, actually, we have a video from our friends at Walter P. Carter Elementary and Middle School in Baltimore that really, we think, exemplifies a lot of this work that we're talking about.
All right, let's cue that up.
Families and educators alike value teamwork, grounded in trusting relationships between home and school.
I use two words a lot with my parents: teamwork and patience. Teamwork because we have to work together. I tell my parents to be patient with me because I'm still trying to catch our students up to their level. I also tell parents, be patient with your student because they're trying, they're giving their best. They give their best to me and they try to give their best to their parents. And I tell their parents to be patient with themselves because some of my parents get frustrated. I don't know why they can't do addition or subtraction. It takes time.
I am very comfortable of my son being here because I know that he's in good hands.
While parents and educators team up, there remains a disconnect between what parents think and teachers know about student performance. More than 9 in 10 parents believe their child is at or above grade level, while only 44% of teachers say most of their students are prepared for grade level work.
Sometimes parents have a unrealistic perception of their scholar and their academics, and that's no fault to them. Sometimes we have to take ownership on a school level of how we communicate academics to parents, how we communicate standards to parents. I've been at this school for about 4 years, so my second year here, we sent home the assessment results, and a parent called and said, "You sent home this assessment, I don't know what this is." And I'm like, we did not explain to parents like how to read this assessment report.
Both parents and educators agree that families having a clear picture of student achievement is a top priority, and trust and teamwork describe the connection they would like to have between home and school.
Not doing it like once a month, not doing it like every 2 months, but doing it consistent where the parents feel that the school care about them, that the school is invested in their child, the school is invested in the livelihood of families.
So one thing I always do is make sure that parents know they see me and I'm visible, and teachers also see that I'm communicating with parents and I know them by name. So teachers see me calling parents by name, they see me calling students by name.
Educators and families deserve systems that prioritize trust and teamwork. What does that look like for your community?
Okay.
Whoops.
Becky, should I take it from here?
Yes, thank you so much. It was such an interesting conversation, and I'm just struck by how just even a light touch can make a difference. So next time I see you, I'm grabbing a cup of coffee and going to learn even more from you. So thanks a lot.
So this is a shared platform campaign for grade level reading and learning heroes. And so now we're going to transition to a conversation with Dr. Sonia Santelises is going to join me. And I'm just going to take a moment to introduce Dr. Santelises. She has been the CEO of Baltimore City Public Schools since 2016. Before that, she was the Chief Academic Officer in Baltimore City Public Schools. She has served as assistant superintendent in other large urban districts. She's been a teacher, a curriculum specialist, a nonprofit leader. She has a doctor of education from Harvard University. She really is I believe, a leader amongst leaders. I've learned a lot from observing you from afar and from reading what you've written, Dr. Santelises. It's really a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
So in a moment, I'm gonna ask you to react to the video because that's your school. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that video in just a moment, but I'm gonna start with a quote because you wrote a really fantastic piece. Well, I thought it was a really fantastic piece in Ed Week in December of 2020. And I'm gonna start by quoting from there. You wrote, this is in the middle of, like right in the middle, December 2020. You said, we have a choice about this crisis. As educators, we can make our new normal, and that's where we got our title from our report. We can make our new normal better than the old, engaging parents as the partners that they are, or we can wait for parents to lose whatever faith in us remains. They cannot unsee what they have witnessed so vividly in their own living rooms. So I'm going to ask you, I'd just like you to speak to this. What does it mean to you to engage with families as true partners?
Yeah, what's interesting when I reflect on that quote as you were reading it, is that really that visibility into the everyday interaction of one's children with educators, schools, the educational community, I think was really brought to a level that we don't always get to, or we didn't get to previously, right? It was, parents, thank you for your child, drop them off, and we'll hand them back to you, right? At the end of the day. And we might have you in, for some treats every once in a while. We might, ask you to help with some activities at the school. But that visibility into the actual learning process of seeing how your child, the children you care for, your family, is actually processing the learning, engaging in the class. In some cases, everything as major as, two extremes. I remember doing a virtual classroom visit, and it was a 4th grade math lesson, and a grandmother pops her head into the screen and asks the teacher, and let's say it's, Mr. Bergman, right? Mr. Bergman, I have a question about that. And, did you mean that, whatever the function was that was going? And the teacher did not miss a beat, asked the question, understood that grandma wanted to be able to follow up with her grandson, right? After this particular class. And then you have other instances where, I heard from some family members that, I couldn't believe how this educator was speaking to my child. And like, they just don't react to that. And I never would have thought, right? So you get both ends of the spectrum. And so what it did was it kind of laid bare that our work is visible, and our work in the detail, and that kind of closing the door, that can't be closed anymore. People saw a whole lot. And my sister teaches at the university level, and she will tell you, even at that level, she had parents sitting behind college age students who were now watching lessons. And so what it did was it gave us the opportunity to reset, to say, wait a minute, we actually should have been partnering as if you were sitting there the whole time. Yeah. Now, how do we take that information and do things better and deeper with that understanding that we really are partnered the same way that grandma came in and asked virtually? We need to be partnering more in that way.
Yeah, that's really the spirit of teamwork, right?
Yes, absolutely.
And that accountability is not so bad. Especially if you're a parent, you send your kids to the school, you want to know what's going on.
Right, that's right.
So I am going to ask you, it's a big district, it's a big system. You have over 160 schools. So, and you're starting to touch on the variability, right? Some schools are good at different things. Teachers are good at different things. That's just, human nature. So when you see that video, when you see Walter P. Carter, I'd be curious to hear your reflections on how schools like Walter P. Carter that had prioritized trust and teamwork before the pandemic, what did you notice about schools that had a culture of trust and teamwork pre-pandemic What did you notice in the difference once the pandemic started?
Yeah, I think the top line answer to that question is they fared better overall. Because they already were building a cohesive structure. So the great piece about Walter P. Carter is that Principal Pinckney. I remember when he first went in and I said, Principal Pinckney, this school has been struggling and I want it to look different in 3 to 4 years. And he was like, yes, Dr. S, I understand. And he really prioritized what you just referenced, that relationship and trust building. Well, now come a once in 100-year health crisis combined with racial unrest, right, happening at the same time. And community trust in institutions is probably at an all-time low, right? People don't trust. Well, that relationship building, that taking of the time, when you see Principal Pinckney's real-time reflection of the parent response to sending home, right, the scores and the family.
That's my favorite part.
I love that.
Yeah.
And you know why it's my favorite part? Because he pauses and he reflects and he doesn't say, what's wrong with this family? They don't know. Principal Pinckney does a self-reflection that says, wait a minute, what did we not, right? What did we forget to do? And actually was willing to look both ways. Well, what that meant in the pandemic and what you can see in that video is in many of our schools with large concentrations of students of color, many of our schools with families who had been hardest hit, right? Some coming from some of the more under-resourced communities, hardest hit by COVID. It was hard to get families to come back. And what you don't see in that video is that Principal Pinckney was able to get much larger numbers of his families back earlier for in-person. And a lot of what families told us was, we trust the school. Right? We trust the school. And where you saw that trust before, the community came together. They trusted what they were being told. They also trusted that their feedback and their partnership would be adhered to, right? And schools were used to helping parents kind of verify what their efforts were. So doing tours ahead of time and making sure parents, what do you need to feel comfortable to bring your young person back? And we saw variability. And a lot of that variability was directly tied to to a school's success in building those cohesive relationships prior to COVID ever hitting.
Yeah. I mean, sending kids to school is really scary.
Very much so.
It was really scary, but we know how important in-person instruction is. And so, and that's what I hear. And when I hear Principal Pinckney say that, like that light bulb moment, to me, it's two things. It's our systems are not designed to just do this reflexively, sharing honest feedback with families. They just aren't. But then you also have that moment where you've got a leader that says, wow, he can take some ownership on it, not feel defensive, like really say like, this is what my job is. You must be a proud CEO, like a proud mom.
No, I was. When I knew it was going to be Walter P. Carter, it was like a no-brainer. Oh yeah, that's the right school community to focus on. Yep.
Let's talk about, I have a question about like the system level response to the pandemic. So the Baltimore City Public Schools has a pandemic recovery plan, and it calls for student learning plans for every student, co-designed between parents and teachers. That seems simple, but that is really hard to pull off at scale. And I don't know that I've seen a system as big as Baltimore try such an ambitious effort. But I think it is really telling to your vision, to the vision of your district, to your vision for equity, and how family engagement is core to that vision for equity. So can you tell us a little bit about the vision for student learning plans? How's it going? What have you learned from trying that?
No, absolutely. And I'm glad that you actually framed it in, the attempt to do it, because would never want to send the signal, yes, we have student learning plans, they went smoothly, nothing to do. But I do think that I remember we were actually sitting, Tina Hike-Hubbard, who is our Chief of Family Community Engagement Communications and Enrollment, right? And those three departments come together because we said, what are the kind of most front-facing activities as a district we engage in? And so Tina was with me, and we were sitting with Sonia Thomas, who heads up the Nashville Powerful Parent Network. And we were getting some feedback about how they were thinking from parents of activating. And I want to give total credit because let me tell you, I don't have time to come up with every good idea. We were inspired by Sonia. And one of the things she said is she really emphasized what we were hearing, which was an urgency in all of our families, in every zip code. How are we going to know where our kids are? How are we going to know where our children are, given what they've been through academically over the past 2 years? And better yet, how are we going to be able to track their progress, right, in getting what they need to be able to perform at level? And I really appreciated in the video how you referenced what, by the way, has been a long-standing discrepancy between where parents view their child's performances and where teachers or standards view the performance as being. That gap has been there before, and we did not want that continuing. And we wanted to be able to be proactive, to have it be strength-based, right? So yes, these are some areas that your child needs to work on, but these are also some ways we're going to support. And we want you to develop with us kind of this plan that builds on their strengths. Now, one of the things that we learned in doing this is that we needed to do a better job as the district in making sure that people understood the vision, because there were some teachers who got it, it resonated with them. They had beautiful meetings with families that were rich and deep. And then we had others where we got the feedback, it felt like a compliance exercise. Yeah. Why? Because to your point, we needed to give more time and space for teachers to kind of own the process, internalize it, and understand the purpose. This wasn't just another plan. It was actually designed to be a two-way communication tool, almost to take from Principal Pinkney's recognition that nobody's going to magically know what test scores mean. And it was our real vision to get ahead of, right, parents wondering, and actually make it more of a joint process. I think our work moving forward, though, is making sure that that depth of communication is known. And this isn't just a teacher tool. And that was one of the things that we learned in how things rolled out, and the variability that some teachers thought, and again, because we needed to communicate more directly, that this was their tool. And if it was their tool, then, well, we got a lot of plans already. Why do we need another one? For educators that understood it as a tool for a teacher and family, and for families to actually help fill out and populate and give feedback, right? And families to have space to talk about their child's strengths, right? And how that was going to build in very different experiences. So it gave us a lot of feedback that said, okay, if we're going to go deep with this, we've got to give space and time to help support teachers in being ready to have conversations with parents about this. But the intent was always, it's got to be a two-way building of the road to get our young people what they might need coming out of the last 2 years.
Yeah. I love that. It's just like honest leadership reflection, modeling, like we're schools, you know, we're learning organizations. And if folks haven't necessarily had the experience of co-designing with families before, which we know that they haven't, of course, there's going to be a learning curve. There's going to be fits and starts. But the reason we cite Baltimore City Public Schools so often in our report is because, like I said before, you're really trying your hand at elevating this work in a lot of different ways. And it's not one thing or the other, it's the totality of them together. So like you mentioned Tina Hike-Hubbard. Most school districts and large urban districts, they don't have a chief for family engagement sitting on the cabinet. Most are not doing this type of work where, and it's because of Tina's presence on the cabinet that she's able to work really closely with the chief academic officer, with the chief business officer, with the chief HR officer. She's able to really design this type of plan with input from the community. I want to talk about, and actually I want to remind folks to please put your questions in the chat, because as soon as I'm going to ask one more question, but then we want to pivot to a Q&A with the audience for a few minutes before we say goodbye to Dr. Santelises. But there's something that I was really taken with, one of the pieces of your strategy, which is this new board policy for family and community engagement. I'm quoting here. It defines family engagement as an essential component for improving the academic outcomes of our students. It also calls for the development of a new rubric, which is basically standards for what family engagement is supposed to look like. What are we going to look like when it gets over time? A lot of community input on the direction of that rubric. I think it's really comprehensive and could be a really good model for other systems that want to elevate this work. Could you just help us understand what went into the development of that rubric? What are you hoping to see in 2 or 3 years as your family engagement strategy evolves?
Yeah, I think in 2 to 3 years, and it's a credit to our community partners as well as our team and our board for really kind of steadfastly supporting this. This was not something they had to be dragged kicking and screaming to, and I think that's important as well.
Yeah.
But I think as we look further out, one of the things I would hope is that our school-based educators feel as if they have the support they need to engage with families more effectively. This last couple of years has left, and I know I am not alone with some of my educator colleagues with this, has really increased the amount of stress that families are under, that educators are under. And so one of the things that we really see is that where there's real kind of deliberate skill building on the part of the district in supporting educators, there's increased kind of competency and effectiveness in that communication. The other piece that our team is really focused on is how do we also use parent leaders, maximize parent leaders in the development of other parents, right? So this commitment to parent leadership as a way of giving parents kind of entree models, more information about how to engage in their child's education. And so that as we move out into further years, I would actually hope that we would have the overwhelming majority of our schools more reflecting Walter P. Carter. I think we have more than we did 3 or 4 years ago, but I want it to be, 3/4 or 4/5 of our schools reflect the Walter P. Carters. But we're further than where we were before. But ideally, we would be able to make a video like you did for Walter P. Carter for every school in Baltimore City school district.
I love that. Because you already have a lot of the answers already. It's not like we're reinventing. You've got really great examples and you've got great leaders that can show the way for other leaders. I want to just invite folks again to, if you have any questions for Dr. Santelises, to please go ahead and put them in the chat. Until we hear directly from folks, I would like to hear you maybe step back a little bit and reflect on, again, going back to the video, going back to the core fundamental need to build, and in many cases, restore trust with the community. Why do you think it has, and you've worked in Baltimore for a long time, but you've worked in other places too, and you've worked outside of schools in the nonprofit sector. I would just be really curious to hear you reflect on why you think it's been hard for schools and systems to embrace family engagement, embrace trusting relationships with families as a core pillar of their work.
Yeah, I mean, Well, one thing I will say is for any human being, all it takes is one or two bad experiences or bad interactions to make you somewhat hesitant to engage again. And I think we haven't really had hard discussions about that, right? We haven't had hard discussions about the fact that we are now 2 or 3 generations out with some families, not all, in Baltimore City, and dare I say every school district I've worked in, that have not had successful, positive, or affirming relationships with schools. And so you have the compounded generational disrespect, for lack of a better term, that you've got to break down and be forthright about. And I think it is naming what it's not supposed to look like. And I'll give you like 1 or 2 examples as a district leader. When I am out in the community in a grocery store or something else, and a parent says to me, well, I was told this or the other, and the information doesn't seem right to me, you know, I don't put the educators in question on blast, but I do make sure that parents know what the real information is. And I say, and you can let them know that the CEO said that you are able, right, to do this as a way, and just like the relief on parents' faces that like, I thought something was off and now somebody is verifying for me. And so one of the things that we've been really big on is how do we get information out? And so it's the beauty of Tina's shop being family and community engagement combined with communication. We also know our high school selection process, right, is a reflection of stratification for a lot of reasons, be it redlining, be it under-resourced communities, and we have to name that. We have to name our own policies and practices. And I frankly apologize to parents a heck of a lot. This work requires humility to be able to say, you're right, we messed up, or somebody messed up before me, or we're going to help make that right. I think the second piece on the part of educators is a real understanding of the communities that we serve. So we have educators who don't necessarily have a lot of experience previously with diverse sets of families, or families that whose background does not reflect their own. And so the ability to do what I would call proficient cross-cultural communications is a skill, but we haven't prioritized that in the education force. And I think that's something that we've been working on, right? So every time a parent raises their voice, and I remember when I was back in a school, you know, teaching and leading in Bed-Stuy in Brooklyn, and I did not take parents like raising their voice as like my signal to retreat. But that was a skill set I had that not all of my colleagues had, right? And so de-escalation, and we have families returning with high levels of stress. We're seeing more interactions, right, between stressed educators, stressed family members. That kind of thing, I think, is part of what we really need to work on.
I so appreciate that. It's communicating with people with humility, asking more than telling. That's a nice way of building trust. I'm going to close with this one last question that we've just gotten in the Q&A from an old colleague, Debbie Pusher, who's a professor in Saskatchewan, Canada. She says, you know, in the face of low student achievement outcomes and concerns about student performance in the pandemic, she says, I'm witnessing a lot of senior education leaders putting more emphasis on literacy and numeracy, despite decades of investment in these areas that have not necessarily brought a return on that investment. So she's asking you, Dr. Santelises, like, what are you doing to convince, educate, transform leaders' mindsets within Baltimore City Public Schools so that they can see family engagement is more important as a strategic investment and not an add-on? Thank you, Dr. Pusher. That's a great question.
Yeah, no, and what I would say is I am pretty emphatic that this is not an either or discussion. And I think for certain communities, we make things either or, right? Either you major in strong relationships or, right, you
Mm.
focus on academic outcomes. And I am pretty vigilant in both my language and kind of structural directives that that's not what this is about. It is a both and that it's actually the involvement of families that helps to move the academic achievement. And I think part of our issue in education is we set either or, particularly when we're talking about high need schools or schools with chronically low achievement. It's almost like we got to pick one or the other, rather than what Principal Pinckney has done. And one of the beautiful pieces about the story of Walter P. Carter is Principal Pinckney said to me, Dr. S., we are going to do, we are doing the academics, we're working on that, but I've got to build trusting relationships as well. And so he put a little more emphasis on that in his early years. I will tell you, it has gained traction. And now you'll see in year 4, coming out of a pandemic, by the way, and we didn't put their achievement scores up, but Walter P. Carter coming out of a pandemic actually has above expected growth in both those areas. And I think it's because they don't see it as a choice between one or the other. He never thought he was relinquishing a focus on achievement in order to engage his parents. He always saw trusting relationships among his staff, between families and staff, as the key to that, because he knows, while we want strong relationships, in the end, if a family's child can't read, that's going to be a breach of trust as well. So it really is hand in hand.
I love that. And, Principal Pinckney makes sure that his staff have 30 minutes a day to contact families. If he can pull it off, why can't more places pull it off? Dr. S, we're going to be, I'm calling you Dr. S now too. Dr. Santelises, we're going to be watching and following and rooting for you. Baltimore is a great place to see where there's a lot of family engagement work happening. We know so much of your work happens behind the scenes. So we see you, we hear you, we thank you. And hopefully in 2-3 years, we will start to see all of those new schools coming out. I'm sure Principal Pinckney's hearing, a lot of principals are probably coming out of the woodwork wanting to know how he's doing it. And that's that slow grind, that's that slow process. And thank you to you for enabling that work, for elevating that work. And we'll let you get to your next thing because you're a very busy person. So thank you, Dr. Santelises, for joining us.
Thank you. And thanks to everybody for really giving this question of families, schools working together this level of time and attention. So thank you all, and thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to transition us now, and I'm going to invite Dr. Lori James Gross to join me on screen. So if we can spotlight her as we transition from a large urban district in Baltimore City Public Schools to a small rural district in Carbondale, Illinois, a district called Unity Point Consolidated School District number 140. Dr. James Gross has been in district administration for 25 years. She's been, the last 20 has been as superintendent. She began her career as a teacher in history and government in San Antonio, Texas. And I have to say, she's really taught me a lot about the impact of true engagement. Dr. James Gross, welcome.
Thank you so much. I am really excited to be here and to share our work. So thank you.
Well, then let's get into it.
Okay.
When I first heard about Baltimore's response to the pandemic, these student learning plans, my first thought went to you. Because I thought about your work with individual student success plans, which is similar to the work of these student learning plans. Can you tell us a little bit about the nuts and bolts? What are individual student success plans? What do they consist of? Who is working on them? Basically, like if I'm a teacher or a family member in your school, what does that look like?
Okay, so just really quickly, just to give you a little bit of perspective, we are a very small rural district, so approximately 638 students. So in comparison to Baltimore City schools, we are tiny, just to put that in perspective. And we are, again, very rural, very conservative area of Illinois, so Southern Illinois. So again, to put that in perspective, we are a good 6.5 hours south of Chicago. Okay,
You're much closer to St. Louis, right?
Yeah, yes, very much so.
Right.
So when talking about individual student success plans, or ISSPs as we call them, we actually began, I guess I lost some.
You're good.
Oh, hold on here, sorry. We actually began that work, oh my gosh, back in 2018. And those plans, the actual focus began specifically on students, working between students and teachers, or students and navigators. And it wasn't until the actual pandemic that it kind of shifted to involving families. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. But the actual plans themselves are about engaging families, or I'm sorry, engaging students to really address their needs, their interests, goal setting, in a way in which to connect students to school and to community. So the ISSP is really about a whole child initiative, something that our Board of Education committed to, oh my gosh, back in 2007. And it really is about creating an environment for students that helps with student voice and self-advocacy, and creating a vision for post-secondary educational and career goals. So the ISSP is really meant to transition with the student as they advance from one grade level to the next, so that as they demonstrate growth and are able to kind of share their strengths and their challenges and their goals moving forward, so that teachers can look to see what that looks like from one year to the next. And we began that process because we were most concerned about what that transition was going to look like from 8th grade moving into the high school level. So students would actually, they were given a choice of a navigator. It could be a bus driver, it could be a cook within the district, it could be their teacher, it could be an administrator, it could be anyone that they felt that they could trust, or that they felt they had confidence in and being a part of that work. So essentially they would meet with this individual to help develop their ISSP, and the components that they would review would not only be academic, but also help to look at what their social emotional needs were, to look at career interests, and then also to look at civic engagement types of opportunities, ways in which that they wanted to actually connect with the community. So if they wanted to, for example, or if they had interests in maybe becoming a veterinarian, we would connect them with a local vet to be able to do some volunteer work and to build out kind of their resume per se, as they were looking forward into their high school career. And so what happened with the pandemic, and I'm going to talk about that again a little bit longer or a little bit later, is that allowed for the family piece, or the actual engagement piece, to kind of evolve. And the ISSP itself has allowed for our students to really build out voice, choice, and advocacy over the last few years anyway.
Sure. Yeah. So I love this because it's just the promise of good teamwork. I mean, it's almost like, honestly, it sounds like an IEP for every kid. Like not the compliance part of an IEP, which has really important merit. We need to make sure that families and kids are given their rights under the IEP process and the 504 process. But what you're talking about is a student and a family and a teacher come together at the beginning of the year, or it doesn't have to be a teacher, it's somebody on the staff. So you're actually distributing this relationship. They talk about, what are we supposed to be doing academically? What are we seeing at home academically? What do we want to be seeing socially? What are we seeing now socially? Where are we now? Where do we want to go? Let's stay in touch over time. And then the part that I really love is, I'm really into sports, so I understand, and I've coached kids, and so like it's really the sum is greater than the whole of its part. Well, you know what I'm saying. This idea that when you and I are in really close touch about, I'm at home, you're at school, and you are asking me questions, and then I'm answering, my responses make your work better in the classroom. And then I feel like I can ask you questions, you tell me what's going on in the classroom. That makes my work at home as a parent better. And so we're in regular touch, and that's really the promise of good teamwork. And so I'm not at all surprised that that teamwork, similar to what Dr. Santelises was saying about Walter P. Carter, about how one school that really did really strong work around family engagement before the pandemic was really able to weather the storm a little bit better. Could you talk about what you've seen as a result? Because you started this ISSP process a couple of years before the pandemic. So your teachers and your families were accustomed to being in more regular touch with each other. Talk about how that impacted the experience of your district during the pandemic.
Sure. Real quick, if you would please pull up the slide, because that's going to speak to exactly what you were just saying. So if I could share that, that'll lead directly into the post-pandemic work.
Sure.
So specifically to what you were just suggesting, this particular graphic was actually created in 2019, 2020, heading into that school year. So right prior to the pandemic hitting. And if you look at it, it specifically speaks to, here's the core of the ISSP, and it speaks to whole child, whole school, whole community, which frankly is exactly what the state of Illinois is supporting for all districts across the entire state. That is supposed to be the work that we are engaging in. And as we were moving into the ISSPs, we wanted to make sure that all of these particular pieces, if you look at it, this is what goes into our ISSP process, making sure that we have our student information, demographics, specific data around exactly the academic pieces that we want to make sure that we are looking at specifically to what Dr. Santelises was talking about with Principal Pinckney, and making sure that a student can read, and parents want to make sure that that piece is as much focused on as the relationship building and so on. Those pieces go hand in hand. And then goal setting, making sure that we have the instructional steps in place, focus areas and reflection are built in within the ISSP, making sure that we're looking at certain learning modalities and student interests. So all of those pieces are talked about and reflected upon within the conversations between student, teacher, and now parents as well. And then all of the various support systems that it takes to put into place. The piece that I want to draw upon before I get into the pandemic is that out of the pandemic came a change to our mission statement as well, to reflect that parent engagement piece.
Oh, beautiful.
Okay. So we have our mission statement.
Learning orientation. I love that.
So we have our mission statement too that was supported by that, because within the pandemic piece coming into the fall of 2020 was the fact that we shifted and we made sure that we moved to ISSPs for every single student within our district. So our Board of Education agreed to a soft start to the school year, which meant that we decided to have one-on-one ISSP meetings for all 538 students. All but one family participated. Wow. Some were held in the homes of our families. Some were held on site. And basically what we did at that point in time was that not only were we building out ISSPs in accordance with the script and the templates that were being that we were utilizing through Harvard, which assisted us with this process, but we were also, because it had been 5 months since we had seen our students, we were re-engaging our families and our students. We were finding out what they needed in terms of dealing with the pandemic, also addressing their fears in terms of coming back to school potentially, knowing that we were going to be in remote as we started the school year. What did they need to be able to participate in the remote setting, assisting them with understanding the remote process, so kind of training them against that particular piece, allowing them to see the mitigations that we had in place, also allowing teachers and families and students to basically just share all things COVID, right?
What are you dealing with?
Concerns, how are we going to get through this? Can we just simply weather this together? And we were able to allow them to build out, these plans of action for their individual families and students that then teachers could manage as we were in these remote settings. These meetings for these families lasted anywhere from 60 minutes to 90 minutes. Some of them were 2 hours long. So it took 2 weeks for us to be able to get through all of these meetings.
Lori, let me ask you a question. Sorry, because I hear so many schools insist on, I just want an hour to 2 hours per kid. How do you pull that off? Where is the money coming from? What are you taking off people's plates? Like, give us the very technical answer so that other folks that are on this call could maybe apply some of what you did in their home schools and districts.
So what we did was I contacted our regional office of education. We indicated what we were going to be doing. It was essentially a normal school day for our teachers. Our teachers came on site. We were considered remote at that time. And so what we did to count our actual instructional hours, we did do some assessments during that time because we hadn't seen our students for 5 months. We also provided actually, while we were training to the remote, what was going to be our remote process, we also did some pencil paper type activities that our students could take home that they would then return to us. So we had to get a little bit creative with that.
Yeah.
That they would allow for us to count, correct? And so they allowed for that through the ROE. But our teachers were putting in full days and they were flexing their time. So like if parents couldn't meet during the regular school day, our teachers created a schedule, and instead of coming in from 8 to 4, they might work 12 to 8 or whatever their time frame may be. So we had a lot of flexibility to be able to do that. Money wise, it didn't cost us really anything in terms of.
Well, if you're using an instructional day, you just manage it that way.
Right. So we were able to use our remote planning days as the state allowed us, kind of just very creatively, right? Now, the really interesting piece to that was once we got back to our regular school year, I've had to find ways to build time into our existing schedule now, because we got to find ways to continue this work. Yeah. And so I've been able to do that through institute days. I have adjusted our schedule. Our teachers have close to 10 plus hours of plan time a week. So that we've built in specials and so forth so that we can continue this work. We do a day coming back from Christmas where it is strictly ISSP work. And our families know that is happening, right? They know that we've got built-in ISSP time associated with that, and that there's going to be accountability on behalf of the parent, the student, and the teacher associated with that work.
That's good.
Yeah, so that's gone really well into our advantage.
So I'm going to invite folks again, if you have any questions, to please drop them in the chat. You can drop them in the chat, or we have a Q&A function. If you can use that function, that would really be great. I want to ask you another question about going back to the impact, because I've heard you say when a lot of school districts are actually losing students because of the pandemic, your enrollment has actually increased. I'd be really curious to hear your take on why kids are coming to your district. What's the connection to these plans? And also at a time when there's been a lot of really nasty rhetoric at school board meetings where the community is up in arms. You're in a really conservative area. And so what have your mask fights looked like? How are you weathering that storm? Tell us a little bit on those two fronts, the enrollment and some of these public displays around masks and other COVID measures, how you think that this emphasis on planning with families impacted that, which we see in so many other districts.
Well, again, I think because we took the time at the very beginning of the 2021 school year to engage in those conversations and to share what our concerns were, and to allow parents to share their concerns and to be in conversation with us, and to have multiple check-ins throughout that school year, they were able to understand that we were putting safety first. We weren't engaging in a political conversation around COVID at all. Our board did not engage in that. And as a result, we did not have any hostile board meetings whatsoever. We did not have any discipline issues whatsoever with regard to mask wearing. I did not have parents here refusing to send their students in masks. We were an early adopter of universal masking, and we did not have any objections to that.
And just to be clear, your neighbors, I'm sure, had their fair share of issues, right?
Yeah. Absolutely, yes. Now, don't get me wrong, we may have had one or two social media issues in terms of, this is happening, why is our district still wearing masks, those kinds of things. But nobody's showing up on campus, nobody's sending their kids without their mask, nobody's showing up at the bus stop without their mask. There was just a very high level of respect for what we were trying to do, and it was an issue of safety. 96% of our staff was fully vaccinated. So there was a very strong message sent to our parents that our staff was taking this very seriously, and that, we supported safety within our building. We were able to host multiple vaccination clinics on site. And I think as a result of that, and the understanding that when we were building out ISSP plans, what has happened is our neighboring schools, parents have figured out that by building out these plans and supporting individual students' needs, individual families' needs, they want that level of support. We have so many families that need that level of support. We've increased by 100 students. So we lost students at the beginning of the pandemic. We've gained those students back and about 75 more. And so that's been fantastic for us as a small district. And I think it speaks to the work that our staff is doing. And when I say our staff, I mean not just our teachers. Our non-certified staff is committed to this work as well. They go through all the same trainings as our teachers do. They are just as engaged in providing a whole child experience as our certified staff. And it takes all of us. When you're in a small district, it takes everybody to be able to provide, this level of support to families and to students. And it takes our families. Another result of this work is we've had our largest volunteer program. Our volunteer program kind of fell off, and now we've got another high level number of volunteers coming back on and assisting us, on a daily basis. So that's been a wonderful outcome too of this work. But I think it was the pandemic that really led us to understanding the importance of building out student success plans and involving parents, because what's happened is that the end of the year success plan check-in, our students lead that work. And it's really incredible to watch a student lead their parent through what their goals are and what they believe to, they lead them through their own data, and they lead them through their understanding of their growth. And that's really exciting to watch an 8th grader or even a kindergartner talk about what their growth looks like with their parents.
No, that's beautiful. That's what you're all hoping for, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Own it and they push it forward. Yeah. I want to get to a couple questions that are in the chat. I'm going to ask Sarah if we could take the slide down, because I think we're good at this point on the slide. But Dr. James Gross, 2 questions, and you can take them in whichever order. One is, do you have a template that you use for the ISSP? What is that template? Because I know you do, and I'm going to give you a chance to share a little bit about what that template is. And the second question is that the families are just tired from the pandemic. It seems like they're worried about a lot of the basics, like a place to live, food insecurity. And for a lot of folks, it seems even harder to engage. Our data shows that parents and teachers are more interested in engaging than they were pre-pandemic. But I would say, what suggestions do you have as far as reaching out to them other than just case management support? Because your ISSP process is not just, what are your needs? Let me address your needs. It's also, that is a component, but it's not the full scope. So what other suggestions do you have for connecting with families? And tell us a little bit about the success plan template that you use.
So with regard to connecting to families, the ISSP is like one little pebble in the pond. So when families come in and we're having these conversations, one of the things that over the last 4 years, and I wouldn't say as a direct result of ISSPs, but it has been a direct result of our work over the last several years around a whole child experience, is that we've really built out services within our building. And so we have a lot of internal services. We've increased our social work services. We've increased our partnerships with outside agencies in terms of mental health agencies, and just city and social agencies that, you know, assist with not only just meeting needs, but just being available to answer questions. One of the things that I've always wanted in our district is when families come in and they just have general questions just about navigating life and navigating, for example, if they're new to Carbondale, that they can walk down the hallway and have those types of questions answered. And that has been something that has been really helpful. And out of that now is coming the creation of a children's cabinet here in Carbondale. And that is going to be yet just another way to kind of build on that engagement. And even though I think people are tired, I think schools are kind of the last standing institution that is really still there to provide supports for families. And they're still looking to us for that level of support. And so it's still kind of, we're still at that level where they're still knocking on our door and they still want to be engaged with us, even if it's just, again, just to navigate just general issues. And so we're still available to them, and we're still just kind of offering whatever supports that they need. As far as the template, got a lot of exciting work I want to share there. We've spent the whole last year working with Worldwide Tech, which is a language service, as well as AlphaNet, and we have developed a interactive ISSP document. I'm not going to call it a dashboard because I think it's beyond that. It actually houses all of our ISSP information and data by grade level. It has the built-in developmentally appropriate script or template associated with each one of the pre-K all the way through 8th grade. And it is also created in such a way that we have 24 different languages within our district. It is created in such a way that each one of our international families can actually participate in the conversation with our teachers in their home language in real time. So it is designed where they can talk back and forth, and they can also see it in their home language. And so we're really excited about that. We're getting ready to roll that out here at the end of this month for the end of the year transitions. And so, yes, I do have a template that I can share. We just finished dumping all of the data into each individual student's ISSP so that it's there for each individual teacher. And so we are getting ready to go. So we're excited about that. That has taken a lot of time. And what'll happen now is that interactive ISSP will now move with that student every single year and can be added to. As a parent is reading through it, there will be an area they can reflect in real time within that platform.
That is wonderful. I mean, that is, Lori, that's just another example of we're going to try something with some core fundamentals of what we think works in schooling, whole child, families, students, and educators working together, trying your hand at it, fumbling with it. You know, I was really encouraged to hear Dr. Santelises, and I'm hearing you talk about too, like we're just iterating upon this. We're not expecting perfection. I mean, anybody who's ever been in a classroom knows that, like, you know, your best laid lesson plans, you know, sometimes they go well, but how often are they actually going really well the first time you try them? Pretty rarely. And so what I'm hearing you say is we're going to keep at this. We're going to keep trying. We're going to keep learning. And I just, you know, I want to close by really thanking you for bringing that learning spirit, because I think that you've taught me a whole lot in the years that I've known you. And I think that it's just so nice to hear such a variety of perspectives of how equity looks in a large urban district, how equity looks in a small rural district. There's a lot to learn from you and from all the folks trying to do this work. So Thank you so much for coming and for showing us the way. I really appreciate this time with you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. So, and I'm going to transition back to Becky, who's going to introduce another member of our Learning Heroes team, our fabulous Senior Manager for External Relations, Kelsey Nelson. So, Becky, back to you.
Thank you. Yes, and it's my pleasure to have a conversation with Kelsey as we close out our webinar today. And she brings a really interesting experience to Learning Heroes in her role as a Senior Manager of External Relations. She comes to this work from America's Promise Alliance and also the National Alliance for Public Charter Schools. She's also worked with the National Education Association, as well as other education-focused nonprofits in Washington, D.C. And she's an award-winning journalist and as an adjunct college professor. So I'm excited to have a conversation with Kelsey about how we put this research into action for communities and for partners. And so my first question really for you, Kelsey, is how does Learning Heroes make research actionable for partners? We can write a report and we can put it on a website, but then what do we do with it?
Great question, Becky, and thanks so much again for having me. Excited to be here. I've been so delighted to hear the conversation that's been going on and delighted to bring us home. And as you said, making research actionable. That's what we do a lot of at Learning Heroes. That's actually what brought me over to Learning Heroes, is to make sure that we can put a face on our research and get it out to the community for everybody to have a part of our research and everybody to become a part of it. We've been hearing a lot throughout today about trust and teamwork, and how are we building that trust and teamwork? We do that through our research by building relationships in the community. My colleague, Dr. Eyal Bergman, showed how we partnered with school districts and brought real life examples to our research. But also my focus is partnering with community organizations. That essentially is what my title is as a Senior Manager of External Relations. Essentially, I'm in the community creating partnerships within the community and really working to amplify voices and communications. So now I'll actually show this in practice. If we can bring the slide up about one of our great community organizations that we've been working with. I'll introduce it while we bring the slide up, but the video you're going to see is from Lakeisha Young. She is a co-founder and also the CEO of the Oakland Reach. If you've been in the media or news, I'm sure you've heard a lot about this great organization. They're doing really great work on the ground with parents and community members in Oakland, really advocating for their students. The Oakland public school system right now is going through a big change with teachers, and the parents are really obviously just fighting to make sure that their voices are heard and that they're involved in their students' education. So I want to show her as an example as someone that we featured for our Featured Learning Hero series. This is a series that we rolled out to once again bring voices to the work in practice that Eyal Bergman has been preaching about. So this is someone in the community who works with schools, who works with parents, who listens to parents, and that's exactly what our research does. We listen to parents and then put it into practice. So now we'll show this quick video and then I will finish answering your question, Becky.
Great.
Started this work because of people like Mama Williams. She went through the public schools here in Oakland over 40 years ago, graduated from high school, but she never learned to read. Then those same schools failed her kids. Today, even before the pandemic, less than 30% of Black and brown kids in Oakland are reading on grade level. Mama Williams will die before that's the life of her grandkids. We built the Oakland Reach because of people like Mama Williams, the mamas, tias, grandmamas, papas, and fathers who the system has failed, but who refuse to let that be the reality for their children and grandchildren. We're focused on empowering families from our most underserved communities to demand high-quality schools for their children. We're demanding power to end the intergenerational cycle of miseducation.
Awesome. So thank you so much for showing that video. And again, this just shows our community partners in action. So for our research, we partner with a lot of national partners that many of you all know, such as the National PTA, National Urban League, Unidos US, and Univision. But that's an example of our community partners on the ground in the community, really telling the stories and bringing our research to life as to why that family engagement practice is so important. And also through our Featured Learning Hero, we really tried to amplify voices and educators and communities of color. And so Lakeisha Young is just one of those examples. We've been dropping new videos each week with different voices in education talking about putting these ideas into practice.
So Kelsey, I think it's one thing to bring this to life for nonprofits and organizations that are used to using research. But I think one of the exciting things that I'm learning about Learning Heroes is how you bring it to life for parents and families. So how are you using research and leveraging it and materials to bring it to life for parents and families?
Yeah, that's the great question. So we do all this research, but we want to make sure that it gets to the people on the ground, right? The direct service providers, because that's who we create it for. Otherwise, we're doing all this work at Learning Heroes that's not getting to anyone. And that means we're not fulfilling ourselves in our jobs. So now we can bring up the next slide. And a way that we've done that is by creating these social media toolkits. My colleague, Howard Winchester, is the mastermind behind these. And of course, we work as a team. Earlier, we saw a video from Walter P. Carter Elementary and Middle School in Baltimore City, and you'll see snippets of those videos actually here in our toolkit that we have. And essentially in our toolkit, we create short video snippets. You guys got to see kind of a longer video snippet that we have that brought our research to life, but also we have quick 1-minute videos that's included in our toolkit. And our social media toolkits, you also get the full PowerPoint presentation of our research. So we do these big reports. Not everybody wants to read that full report, so we turn it into easily accessible information for the community. We also do this by creating infographics that can be shared throughout the community. So again, bringing the research to life and making it for visual learners, for people who are on social media to quickly, easily digest it, but to also share this information online. And so this is pushed on our website and throughout all of our social media channels. And so again, this toolkit, you can see you can share it easily on Twitter. You can also share it on Facebook, Instagram, wherever you are. And again, it brings it to life and breaks it down. I like to say in layman terms for the everyday person to really understand what we're pushing out. And it's really important that we do these toolkits because we release research throughout the year. And I'll touch on it. We're talking to parents, teachers, students, families year round. And so we want to make sure that everything that we put out is in the community and then for them to be able to download. And so we also share this through our partner emails, of course, but our social media toolkits have actually been one of our most downloaded tools on our website, which is really exciting to us to see that partners are really trying to find ways to engage this work and share this work and to really be involved in our work as well. And so something that I also do with my colleagues, of course, is actually do what we're doing right now, Becky, going to webinars with parents and families, going over these toolkits, sitting down with them, answering these questions and presenting this in a way to them that's, again, something that they can ask me questions about, but also something that they can really see is meant for them. And I'm speaking with them and not at them. And that's what we do through the research that we create.
Great. I just dropped a link to the toolkit in chat. And I know we had a question earlier in the webinar about examples of schools that are doing this. So how does Learning Heroes amplify and lift up good examples of family engagement from those schools and districts that you're learning about through your research?
Yeah, that's a great question. And this is what happens when Learning Heroes listens to the community. It listens to people. We get great examples of this from community members that are saying, hey, look at this group, look at that group. I actually just got back from Memphis, Tennessee with a group called the Memphis Lev, who has been long praised for their work in the community and parents and advocates. And it was great to have a chance to speak with them during the re-grand opening about the work that we're doing at Learning Heroes and family engagement. And they were actually featured on our webinar that we actually did, our convening that we actually held last week for senior leadership in schools. And so this is another example of how we bring our toolkits to life. I believe we have one more slide kind of just showing our toolkits in action. And also this is why co-branding our materials is also very big and tailoring our research to the needs of the community. And so our research actually informs all of the different materials that we create at Learning Heroes. And then we of course use that research to make these tools. And then we work in the community to make sure that they're personalized for that community. Because at Learning Heroes, we don't believe one size fits all, but that one size fits one. That's something that we always preach. And I know in my work that I work with so many different community members to make sure that this research is attainable on the ground. And so I want to invite everybody again to please, while you're here, if there's something that's resonated with you today, if you want to share our research from Unlocking the How, we also recently released our Parents 2021 research that looked at the mindsets of educators, teachers, and students and principals in schools. I also invite you to download that. And then last year, we also had great OST research that I'll also flag for everybody. Since summertime is right around the corner, which I know might be hard to believe, and we all are trying to, of course, engage in family engagement practices. We just wanted to flag that for everyone. And this is an easy way that you can, again, share it on social media, which is the top way that many people are engaging now. And also, you can put these clip to tweet in your email newsletters or any other communications that you have for your community groups.
yes, Sarah just put a note in. We do have a poll. Just slide that kind of out of your view of the screen, but we would appreciate everybody taking that poll for us. We'll still stay on a little bit longer with Kelsey. And I think we might even have another slide to look at, right, Kelsey?
No, I believe that's kind of the wrap. So again, just want to make sure that everyone knows, like, through our toolkits, again, we have video shorts. And again, these are short examples of videos because not everybody's going to want to read a full report. And look, we're all different learners. And again, this is just a great way to easily share this information, and also our infographics. And I really want to push that. Our social media tools that we've created, they have really great organic reach, which means people are actually going online and looking for this information. And then we work to engage with them in this information to make sure that it's coming to life, Becky.
Yeah, and I would just really encourage folks to go on, take a look at this. It's so extraordinary. It's so open sourced, and the report is very, very interesting, and it's worth your time to read it. Even if you're not a report reader, it's well written, it's easy to read. So if you're up for it at all, do read it. But yes, there's all these other really extraordinary resources that are available to you. It's wonderfully done. So Kelsey, thank you so much. Ayal, thank you so much as well for being here today. Dr. James Gross, thank you so much. I'm so excited about the work that's going on in your school district. It just sounds extraordinary. And Dr. Santelises had to leave us early, but the work that's going on in Baltimore is just amazing as well. And I love, the campaign for grade level reading. We have small communities up to large urban communities as well. So it was great to really highlight two different sizes and the extraordinary work that can go on. We have a note from Sarah that was just encouraging you all to fill out that poll. So I think that we got that done. So Ayal, do you have any other further thoughts before we sign off?
I don't. Just, thank you to Campaign for Grade Level Reading. You're always such a great partner, and you do such important work. So it's nice to count on such wonderful partners. And to everybody who's out there listening to this webinar, we're always really curious to hear what resonates for you. So don't hesitate to be in touch with us at Learning Heroes. We're looking forward to hearing what works and what resonated or what good pushes you have. But yes, that's all. Thank you
all. Yeah, thank you all for joining us today. You'll get the resources. We have a lot of wonderful upcoming webinars. Please register and sign up for those. And we will look forward to seeing you on one of our upcoming webinars. Thanks all for being here today.